This is a topic that I've been thinking about for quite some time, not because I'm terminally ill at this point, but just because I feel it's so valuable. So, first of all, I'd like to start by asking ourselves, what is death? Death is the end, death is the doorway, death is the beginning. So, in many cultures, including our own, death is the elephant in the room. There's a movie out in the movie theaters right now called The Farewell, and it's about a Chinese family that has a sick auntie or a sick grandmother. I haven't seen the movie yet, but they're trying to get the family to come together to say goodbye without saying goodbye. So they're forcing one of the younger generation into a marriage so that they have an excuse to bring everyone together to say goodbye to the auntie, even though she's not aware that she's terminally ill. So it's an interesting kind of way of dancing around this uncomfortable subject of death. I'm not sure I agree with it. The kids' movie, Coco, that came out a couple of years ago, was really just more direct about the beauty of death and how we honor the dead and how we respect the dead. And it was an interesting concept for Disney to put on a movie about death. It was so brave, but it worked fantastically. And it showed that there's a continuity. And that if there's a continuity in our hearts between those that remain alive on earth and those that have passed on into the other world, then that's the main thing. That is the continuity. If you imagine how God set it up, He set it up that way. God didn't create His love objects just so that He could grieve over their loss every time they passed away. I mean, if God is that much of a masochist that He enjoys grieving and enjoys the pain of losing His beloved, that's not a universe that we should feel safe in. And it's not the one we live in. So God set us up so that we enjoy this earthly experience, grow our heart, and develop a relationship, an eternal relationship with the people around us and with our Lord God, our parent, our heavenly parent. So death is, in that perspective, is simply what birth is to a baby. You're leaving one dimension and you're entering another. And whilst you prepare for your birth in your mother's womb, by preparing things that you don't need necessarily to live inside the womb, so it is that we are supposed to be preparing our hearts whilst we are living in this physical dimension. Again, you don't need to love in order to exist. You can live your life in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety if you want, and then die. But if you do that, you continue in the spiritual dimension with that same state of mind and that same state of heart. So, contemplating death, what is death? Everything is temporary. We're all passing through this time and space continuum, and for us to contemplate our physical demise is going to be a helpful experience. Because death is the great equalizer. Whether you're rich or poor, black or white, male, female, doesn't matter. In the end, we all die. It's an unavoidable reality. So what is the problem with it? What is the problem with death is that we exist, we live, we breathe, we dwell, but we're not fully awake. We're not fully alive. We're so distracted by our existence, by all the petty things in life, We get in our car, we drive from A to B, we arrive at location B. And if somebody were to ask you, how did you get here? You can say, oh, I came by car. What do you remember from your trip? Hardly anything. We're hardly allowing ourselves to pay attention to the magic of life happening all around us. We get so pulled into the micro details of life. We get so busy trying to control what's going to happen. You know, we get so busy thinking about our past and trying to figure out what happened, and we get so busy trying to control our future, trying to manipulate things and trying to manipulate life, that we don't really allow the fullness of life to be present in our life. So the problem that we experience is that when death comes along, we feel like the person in a restaurant who's just starting to eat their food, and then the waiter comes and wants to take the plate away. You're like, oh, stop, hey, oh, yeah. You would protest if you can anthropomorphize death and imagine death as a physical person that comes up to you and says, time to go, buddy. You'd be like, stop, wait, you're supposed to give me some warning. This is too, what? What would death say? Death would be shocked. What do you mean you need another day? What do you mean you need another week? Last year I gave you 52 weeks. What did you do with those? What about the rest of your life? What did you do with those? What would you say? I didn't think it was that important. What a thing to say about your life. So thinking about death gives value to life. When there's a scarcity of something, it gives value. Why are diamonds so valuable? Because there's not many of them in the planet. Why is gold so valuable? Because there's not much of it around. When you have scarcity, you increase the value of that thing, of that commodity. So if there's a scarcity of life, if there's a finite amount of life, then we start to realize the value. I worked with this 70-year-old pest inspector in my line of work. I meet people in the building trade, and he had deliberately stopped working on weekends. He's 70 years old, he's still working. He says, I stopped working on weekends because I can see I have a finite amount of weekends left that I want to spend with my wife and my family. And I realized that, that's the most important thing, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to focus on that. And I thought, oh, that's great. So I did the same thing. I don't work on weekends for the last 2 years. I just realized, there's many roles we have to play in our life. We have to play the role of parent, we have to play the role of brother, sister, son, daughter, etc. Husband, wife. We've got to be able to find the Tao, the middle way between all the extremes of life, pulling us this way, pulling us that way. We have to find the balance. That's our job. It's our job to grow our heart, to develop our love relationships. That's not something that happens to us like the growth of lungs happens to a baby, the growth of eyes happens to a baby, even though those things are not needed inside the womb. But the growth of heart is completely in our control. Why? Why? Because love has to be voluntary. It can't be forced. You can't force someone to love you. I mean, you can program a computer to say, I love you, and to serve you. But that's not love. Love is the intangible reflex or reaction from a subject to an object to a subject, and it has to be voluntary. If it's forced, it's not love. It no longer becomes love. It has to be freely received and freely given. And that is the reason why God cannot force us to grow our heart. We have to voluntarily decide, I'm going to experience the fullness of life in all its complexity, in all its wonders, in all its tragedies. I'm going to digest every single moment of life, so that when the waiter comes to take my plate away, I'm going to sit there going, thank you. That was a wonderful meal. And even though there's food left on my plate, I'm not going to feel sad when that plate is taken away. In reality, that is the kind of life we want to live, right? And how do we experience the fullness of that life? Do we have to go to Kilimanjaro and walk up the Mount Kilimanjaro? Do we have to hike up Mount Everest in order to have a peak experience and go, now I've lived? Do we have to visit the 7 wonders of the world in order to go, yes, I've lived a full life? We can live a full life in our own backyard, in our own town, just through the people that we meet. When we think about the complexity of interactions, there's so much going on. There's an author called Malcolm Gladwell. His latest book is called Talking to Strangers. And in the book, he's talking about some tragic interactions that had tragic consequences when 2 people met and they completely misunderstood each other, and it ended in tragedy. So police shootings is one example of a tragic interaction between 2 individuals, and misunderstanding each other's intent and purposes ended in tragedy. But it goes on a much more subtle level. This author explained that he wanted this editor to work with him, so he hired, her name was Mia. And Mia told him, I work with Julia. I bring Julia into all my projects. And he said, okay, fine, whoever Julia is, fine, bring her in. So he brings in Julia. Malcolm Gladwell does not like Julia at all. He thinks she's like flaky and a little bit too much of a hippie style and too much this and too much that. He doesn't like her, but Mia says, I work with Julia. Julia stays. So Malcolm tolerates Julia for the first year of their relationship as an editor. But then something amazing happens. By being in close proximity to Julia, and by seeing her work from a new, fresh angle, over time he starts to realize this woman's genius. She's amazing. She took something that I wrote that was kind of, and she made it amazing. That was Julia. And then now, if Julia was to say to Malcolm Gladwell, oh, I'm moving on, I'm going to do a different project, he would be devastated. He'd be, no, stay! The point is that he was, in that situation, forced into having a relationship with Julia. His instinctive reaction was, I don't like this lady, it doesn't work for me, let's, move on. Now he realizes, how many times in his life has he rejected people because of his instinctive reaction to them was like not a positive one, so he just moved away. And if you multiply that in our life, how many people do we just not get, we not understand the wealth of their character, their heart, what they bring to the table, what they can bring to our life? If we were to have a little bit more patience, a little bit more of an open mind, a little bit more of an open heart, we can understand people on a whole new level. In our church, we have, it's popular to have arranged marriages, or at least it was, in my generation. That's a good example. You get thrown together with somebody that you hardly know, and you either have to accept, yes, or no, I'm going to make this work. And there's been countless testimonies of people saying, yes, I'm going to make this work with this person that I don't know, I met them yesterday, but we're going to make this work. And by golly, they made it work. And they ended up loving each other deeply, and they ended up making wonderful families, because both of them decided we're going to make this work. The point is that there's so much to people that we don't know. And we have to remember how much we don't know. And if we have a trust in God and a trust that God is guiding us in our life, and you can call it life flow, life energy, and so forth. If you have a deep trust of that God is guiding your life, then you can say yes to relationships that you otherwise would shy away from, or that doesn't make me feel comfortable, or I don't want to do that, or I don't want to do this. And that, by surrendering to those experiences, you grow your heart, you grow your mind, you become a deeper, better, more compassionate, more sympathetic, etc., etc. Add on all the adjectives you want, person. So what is death? Death makes us think. It makes us think about the quality of our life. In fact, it's the greatest paradox in the universe that death is the greatest teacher about life. If it wasn't for death, we wouldn't value life. We wouldn't treat it with so much dignity. As we get older, do we not value life more than when we were younger? When I look at my driving habits from age 20 and I compare them to age 50, I'm like, whew, I was lucky to get out of my 20s alive. Because now I value life more than I did back then. Back then, in fact, there's a name for those kind of people. They're called the invincibles. All right? That's what the insurance companies call them. They're the people that get into cars, have a few drinks, and nothing's going to go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. I'm young, I've got fast reflexes. It's over. You know, the young invincibles. As we get older, we realize, whew, I'm more vulnerable than I realized. A lot more vulnerable. And so we start to respect, or give life the respect that it deserves. So that is why we fear death. We just feel like, I haven't finished my food yet. There's more things I want to eat. I still feel hungry for life. Why are you taking it away from me? I don't feel good about this. Whereas if we're wise, we live a full life in our interactions with people. We feel full. And when some spirit comes to take it away, we're okay with it. We're sad in a way, but we're okay with it because that's the way we lived. So what attitude should we have towards death? I think we need to think about it. I was just talking to Mike before this. In our family, we call him Uncle Mike. So I was going to say Uncle Mike, but he's just a little bit older than me. So about this topic and how, preparing for the inevitable is a very smart and loving thing to do. It puts less or no burden on the people that have to pick up after us. I read a book last year called Swedish Death Cleaning. And I thought it was a fascinating title, so I read it. And it was all about a woman in Sweden, Swedish Death Cleaning, who does this practice. And Sweden's not a religious country, but there's a sense of like, the most loving thing I can do is get my house ready so that when I pass away, my kids don't have to claw through all the clutter and figure out, okay, what did Nana want me to have, and what did Nana want my sister to have, and what should I do with this, and does this have any value, and all this kind of stuff. So Swedish death cleaning is all about preparing for the inevitable by clearing out everything, by labeling things that you want to hand down to your children so that they know what's theirs, and there's minimum fuss when you pass on. I thought it was a fascinating concept, especially given the fact that there's no real sense that there's continuity after death. But the most loving thing is to focus on those left behind. So what attitude should we have towards death? We should have a healthy respect for this great educator in our life. if we can have that kind of attitude, I think we're going to live a very different life than the one we've been living. But not for the people that are wise. When Jesus knew he was going to die, did he change his lifestyle? Did he go around the streets and tell everyone that he loved them? He was already doing that. His lifestyle didn't change a bit because he was already living the maximum lifestyle that a person can live. He was doing already as much as he could do. First of all, to live a life of love, and secondly, to do his mission as the Messiah. Unfortunately, his mission also depended on the people around him doing their mission, which unfortunately didn't work out. So that's why Jesus went the path of the cross, which he also did willingly. He wasn't afraid of death. He was sad because he knew that the mission that he was going to accomplish wasn't the full mission of the Messiah, which he wanted to accomplish in order to alleviate the pain of God's heart. So, if we live a full life, if we're having deep interactions with our loved ones, and even with strangers, if we're having that kind of life and then death taps you on the shoulder and says, "You've got 1 week, buddy," how would we feel? If we feel nervous, if we feel fear, it means we're not living our fullest potential. If we think about that now rather than on that day, for instance, I was thinking about this in the car, that for people who have a disease like cancer, and they're told specifically, you've got 3 months, 6 months, whatever, in a sense that's more, it's better than just saying, "Bye honey," jumping in your car, and 2 minutes later somebody side rams you and you're dead. And you had no warning, no nothing, your whole life ahead of you, blah, 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 you know, and suddenly it's gone. And people have died doing everything. Everything that you're doing, sitting down, walking, standing up, sitting on the bathroom, in a bath, diving off a cliff, coming, you know, whatever it is. I went shopping. He died while shopping. He died while cooking. You can imagine somebody died doing that thing. We have no guarantee on life. We have no guarantee when the last breath goes out and doesn't come back in. Nobody has such a guarantee. There is this story from Cicero from the before, in the 4th BC, 45 BC, about the king of Sicily, who was a tyrant, and he didn't trust anyone. He lived in perpetual fear. He had one court servant who used to shower praises on him every day. "Oh, you're so great. Oh, you're so wonderful. What a wonderful life you must have. Blah, 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 blah." And then this king said, I think his name was Dionysius II, he said to Damocles, his courtier, he says, "Oh, you think I have a good life? Come and sit down and sit in this throne and act like you are me and you're the king." So very nervously he approaches and sits down on this throne, and then the waiters come, the servants come, and they give him all the best fruits and the best cuts of meat, and he's like, "Whoa, this is great, yeah." And then the king hangs a razor-sharp sword hanging by a single horsetail thread above his seat. And he looks up nervously and he sees this dagger pointing towards him, and he's like, he can no longer enjoy the wonderful food in front of him. And then he asks the king, says, "I think I've had enough of this wonderful life you're living. May I be excused?" At which point he's excused. So Damocles' sword has now become a famous story, repeated in many cultures across the world. And even the term "hanging by a thread" relates back to this story of imminent danger, living life in imminent danger. There is actually a famous Indian yogi who lived his life thinking that there's a sword hanging by a thread above him at all times. But he didn't live in perpetual fear. He lived in a state of awareness and experience. He decided, I'm going to experience my life fully, not knowing when that thread is going to be snapped and that sword is going to plunge into me. I think it's healthy, not morbid, to think like that. I think if we imagine that our life is finite, we don't have to imagine, we know. But if we remember it, we contemplate death, we think about the value of our life, we will be not tempted to waste it, but rather we will invest it fully, not knowing when that last breath will come. So that is the kind of conclusion I think we should reach, that although death is an unpleasant topic to talk about, it really shouldn't. It's a very important part of our life. And if we don't think about it, it will come as a surprise, and we can often leave a mess behind us that others will then have to clean up. And I mean financial and so on and so forth. So for us to think about death is important for the way we live our life. For the way we live our life. So when that waiter comes to take that plate, thank you. That's the only word that comes out from your heart. Thank you. I appreciated my life. I had a wonderful life. I loved fully. I experienced so many emotions. I experienced the heart, the depth and the breadth of God's heart. I now can live, can dwell in the heart of God, in the very heart of God, knowing the heart of God, with all the highs and the lows and everything fully experienced. I didn't run away from everything. I stayed open. I surrendered to life. I had a good meal, and I'm so happy. If we have that attitude, living our life as if we're on the verge of death, because we are, that will be a good life. Please join me in prayer. Our dearest Heavenly Father, thank you so much for giving us life, giving us this opportunity to live on this earth. We deeply appreciate this playground of love, where we get the opportunity to experience love and to develop our capacity to breathe in and breathe out love. Please help us to surrender to life, so that when our death finally comes, we will not feel unsatisfied by our life, but rather we will have this deep satisfaction that we had a good life, a deep life, a meaningful life, a purposeful life. Help us to find that depth inside of our hearts, because it's there. Help us not to be distracted, but rather to be impacted by your love in our everyday life and living. We thank you so much for this reminder, and we offer you this prayer through Christ our Lord, and in everyone's name, our Jew and our